What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates in a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. And before I introduce my buddy, longtime friend, Tom Gersbeck, I want to first tell everybody where they can find the podcast. Pretty much anywhere: iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you can find Two Dates in a Dash. Please hit the subscribe button and the automatic download. That'll help me a lot as far as getting my numbers where they need to be. And I truly do appreciate your support. For those that want to learn more about me personally, about my book, A Brother's Love, a Memoir, you can go to my website, mattcubbler.com, which also has all the podcasts on there as well, the audio and the video of each episode so far. This will be episode 86. So you got quite a few to choose from. All right, without further ado, my man, Tom Gersbeck. How are you, bud?
Very good, Matt. Very good. How are you today?
Fantastic, man. Busy day, which is always a good day for me. I love being busy. I love staying active. I want my day to be full, so I'm not trying to figure out what to do with myself.
Yeah, I don't think you've ever had any problems doing that.
No, busy has never been a problem for me. I think I have adult ADD, and I thrive, and I know you are as well. You're very similar, but we thrive in chaos.
Yes.
Like if it's calm and everything's at peace, I'm chaotic inside. When it's chaotic outside, inside I'm at peace. It's a very weird dynamic.
My blood pressure just drops. I'm in my comfort zone when things are nuts. That's very true.
And we're going to talk about Tom and why he is nuts, and the years and years of nuttiness that he's had. Tom and I go back to our days as federal air marshals. Tom was, I was a member of the Philadelphia field office, and Tom was our crazy bomb tech guy who taught us how to identify and handle, if necessary, God forbid. I remember, and I told the story in my last podcast, but I'm going to tell it again because it's germane to what we're talking about here. I remember in Air Marshal Basic, we were going over to bomb tech stuff, and it was the very low level information, just giving us an overview of what potentially could happen on an airplane at 37,000 feet. And they were talking about how we would have to potentially take, a bomb that's in like a UPS envelope that's got a pressure switch, and how we got to somehow slide the card of the front seat card that tells you how to use your flotation device, and slide that underneath there and apply pressure and carry it from the front of the plane to the back of the plane where the LRBL is, and somehow build a bomb cave out of luggage and wet blankets and bras and socks and belts, and do that while everybody, 140 people, are going completely apeshit on an airplane because they think we're all going to die. And I just remember I raised my hand as he's explaining this to me, and the only thing I could think of, and you'll appreciate this, I raised my hand. He goes, "Yes, sir." I said, "Listen, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but what you just described was some motherfucking MacGyver bullshit." I said, I don't buy 1 ounce of anything you just said to me. I said, and I can promise you that I'll probably trip over the first person's foot in row 3 with that bomb in my hand, and we're all going to die anyways. So I might as well just leave that son of a bitch right there. And then he told me to leave the class. Which is fine. I probably deserve that. But I learned a whole lot more about bombs and different types of bombs and how they're made, and especially when we got into the bomb vests and IEDs and all that other stuff we talked about because of you, Tom. And I remember that knowing that you were completely insane because that's what you chose to be a part of. I have to respond.
Well, Matt, though, what you just laid out, though, is actually quite interesting, because many people do not know that, is that of all the law enforcement, FBI, ATF, NCIS, the various ABC federal agencies, military, local state police departments, the only law enforcement personnel who are specifically taught how to not only inspect and assess, but then also move an IED of federal air marshals. And that's due to the very unique location in which you may find it. You know what I mean? So it's absolutely a last ditch resort. But my initial experience with that goes back to 1989. when I was blowing up aircraft for the FAA. At that time, it was the FAA's explosives unit, which after 9/11 became the moved under TSA, under the Federal Air Marshal Service, as the explosives division. But at that time, I had no idea what I was being asked to do. Hey, go to Tucson, you know, the big airplane park they have out there. And myself and another guy was stationed in Yuma at the Marine Corps Air Station in Yuma at the time. And myself and a guy named Tim McCoy, retired as a master gunnery soldier. Myself and Tim went out there, and we had 3 cases of grenades, Mark Deuces, M26s, and M69s. And we did shots with, we did a whole grenade series of testing on aircraft. And then we rebuilt that single speaker Sony side adjusting from the KAL flight.
Yep.
That was a couple of years earlier. Well, they also had a wine bottle with PLX, Picatinny liquid explosives. We didn't do that. We only did the radio part of it. And at that time, that was classified. Now, LRBL and all of those devices are unclassified. You can find the information online. And actually, there was a book named Tears of My Heart, was written by the woman who was captured, the old guy who was captured. Remember, he bit the cyanide in his cigarette and died. And that's a clue, you know. Right. So they ran over and snatched the girl's cigarettes from her, and she had a cyanide capsule in the filter too. And they were North Korean agents who had destroyed the aircraft. So we were tasked with rebuilding the radio portion of that device. We were given everything. So from the intel that was obtained from her, and we completely rebuilt that. And then we did the training video with it in the overhead cranking, and then in an LRBL. They did a whole training film. It was, you know, different airlines host the training every year, and that year was Delta Airlines. And the pilot, the co-pilot, the flight attendants, they were all phenomenal working with. And they went ahead and did a whole training film. So the aircraft was all cleaned up, and they built out the whole LRBL. And then after they stepped off the aircraft, we got on, dug down in there, pulled out just the fake radio, and then put in the IED version 1, rebuilt the LRBL back up, and blew it out. And that was July 2nd, 89. Because if you recall the grenade films I showed you in training in Philadelphia, I was able to obtain that video, that whole series of videos, and I extracted those clips, and that's what I was using, because I knew we had them, because I had done the training. What was that? I was in 04 by the time, because I started the end of 03. So that was, you know, almost 15 years later, we were using those videos.
Well, the best part is I don't think people understand, and we're going to get really into the weeds with this stuff, but how technical understanding just how a bomb is made, and how its projection blast radius, for lack of a better word, and how, depending on the type of device it is and how it's constructed, will determine how it blows up. And that if you can directional position a device on an airplane, technically speaking, if you blow it up in the right spot, the thing will still fly for a period of time. And that's the whole reason why. And an LRBL, for people that don't know, that's a least risk bomb location. So every plane manufacturer has an LRBL area within that airplane that is designed to withstand, and I forget how much pounds of C4 explosive can be handled, and how that would work. But all the demonstrations that you showed us from like the inside of an aircraft, watching a detonation of at an LRBL, and showing how only the area, you know, within 1 or 2 rows of that LRBL were affected, and everything else was unaffected. And it's just pretty cool how. And that's when I really started to understand the value of what they were showing us at Air Marshal Basic. Wow, the construction of the whole thing, I still call bullshit on that word. That I don't think, practically speaking, it's going to get built the way they're saying. But if it does, I do appreciate now the value of how, even though rustic it is, how important it is to have that ability to create an LRBL and allow a device to have its potential explosion to be outward in a certain location.
Yeah, and even with EOD and bomb squads, a lot of the countermeasures that are used is nothing more than a specific application or manipulation of the physics. You're just trying to use it to your advantage instead of the other the bad guy, whoever made the device, not to their advantage, but to your advantage.
All right. I ask the same question to every single person. Every person I know that's been on this podcast gets the same question. I'm going to ask you this question. How you answer it is up to you. And the reason why I ask this question, Tom, is because I've known you for 20 years, but if somebody would ask me who is Tom Gersbeck, it may be different coming from me than if somebody said, hey, Tom, who are you? So I always ask my guests to one question. That question is, who is Tom Gersbeck?
It's a bit of a trick question. Yeah. So I guess I'd say a workaholic, idiot savant, retired Marine, former explosive specialist and explosives branch chief with the Federal Air Marshal Service, contractor, university professor, all in one, because I've been teaching at Oklahoma State University the last 7 years, and I taught at Foley Dickinson online classes for about 6 years as well, up until 2010 when I went back to contracting. But it's I say workaholic because, like yourself, I can't sit still when things are hectic and crazy. I'm happy when things are calm. I need to get busy and find something to do. Savant, because if it doesn't have anything to do with explosives or military ordnance or battlefield archaeology, I will not remember it from the second I hear it until I could walk as far as that door. It'll be gone. That's so heck, I forgot my wife's birthday the first 5 years we were together. And I asked her, well, she asked me one time, why do you always forget my birthday? You remember all these random numbers about this crap that nobody gives a shit about, but you can't remember my birthday. To which I said, well, if I don't remember all of those little numbers and names, it might get me killed. And she turned around and she jabbed her finger into my chest. She said, yeah, forget my fucking birthday again. Haven't forgotten it since. She put it in context. You know, if something can kill me, I'm going to remember. If it can't kill me, I just don't give a shit. It's, you know,
it's and that's that what I hear when I hear you explain who you are, it's first of all very linear, and I think you have to be linear in your world where there's steps and processes, and you can't skip ahead when you're trying to defuse a bomb, right? And I am I'm linear in very small segments of my life. The rest is just me trying to catch things, and like it's I don't have I'm linear in my when somebody asks me to solve a problem, like a crime, when I'm investigating a crime, but in my personal life, I'm very chaotic, but organized, in my brain chaotic. But it's,
if I'm trying to hang a door, fix the toilet, and do dishes and iron clothing, I'm not going to do those 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to do all 4 at the same time, because I'm constantly changing. I won't get bored. As soon as I'm sick of ironing for a minute, I'll go over do dishes, then I'll go over start working on the door. When I have to use the toilet, well, then I'll finish fixing that. So then, you know, and then I'll back over to the clothes, back over to the dish. You know, I have to have more than one thing going on, and then I'll make things chaotic that are already organized, just so that I feel more comfortable.
And I think that's part of the. And I bet, like when you're teaching, it's very detail oriented. It's very step-by-step process, which is about when you're teaching about the thing that you're most passionate about, which is, ordnance disposal and that kind of stuff. So that you can't not be linear.
And I'm doing a lot with post-blast, interdisciplinary post-blast investigation. And the reason we did interdisciplinary, actually, I'm the one who wrote it and titled the class as well. I debated this with multiple people, because initially I had named it multidisciplinary. Multidisciplinary, to me, means one after another.
Mm-hmm.
Interdisciplinary means that as the chemist is working, so is the biologist, so is the fingerprint person, so is the, and some steps do come one after another. But in many cases, when you're on a scene, or even as the stuff goes to the lab, it kind of goes off in different directions, but the information has to come back, and it has to get to that intel person who's able to start figuring out what these pieces look like and where those pieces fit, so that information can get put into the right hold. So there's especially I guess post blast is a really good example of organized chaos. But most of the people working in the field tend to be very comfortable in that environment, but it ultimately has to get back to an intelligence person who has a very disciplined perspective on figuring out where that stuff fits and getting the information to the right people.
All right, let's do a little a linear breakdown of your life. So let's go back. We're not going to start back when you were wearing like your Chuck Taylors and corduroys. We're not going to have that conversation, but we'll talk about from the time you enlisted into the military. What was it about the Marine Corps that made you choose that branch versus any of the other branches that were available?
Well, I have a heck of a family history in that regard. So my mom is one of 6 kids, 3 brothers. All 3 were Marines. 2 retired. One, the youngest, her maiden name is Caulfield. So if you look up General Caulfield, Matt Caulfield, that's my uncle. He was actually a full bird when I enlisted. He retired in the mid 90s as a 2-star. Then the early 90s, 93, 94 timeframe. My Uncle Bob was an LDO captain, former enlisted up to gunnery sergeant, and then warrant officer, and then retired as a captain in 77. And then my Uncle John was he was with Echo Company 29, severely wounded twice in Vietnam. 13-month tour, had 13 named campaigns that he participated in. And after coming back to the States, 19 years old, was killed in a car accident.
Oh.
And that was my godfather, as a matter of fact. So then on top of that, my dad was a former Marine. He did he went in on a 3-year enlistment, extended for 6 months to spend more time in Okinawa. And then, of course, married my mom. So a lot of his friends were former Marines. So I ended up, a lot of history as far as the family goes with the Marine Corps. In my case, I was out of high school for 2 years, barely made it out of high school, went to a crappy school, Brentwood, New York. Anybody on Long Island listening will certainly know it's just not known as a haven of people who go to college. And then I was out of school 2 years, and I was working in a factory, and I said, man, I can't do this. I have to do something. And I went down, took the test, scored high on the aptitudes for mechanic and electrical type stuff. So I get a guarantee. I end up as a truck mechanic. So I ended up doing that. I was with 2 different artillery units, 11th Marines, 12th Marines. And then I was able to get to a unit called Anglico, which stands for Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company. And the commanding officer was a guy named Rick Harmon, retired as a lieutenant colonel. But he, Vietnam vet, and his entire philosophy was that everybody has to have a fundamental working knowledge of everyone else's job, and then you have to be the expert in one. And from that, here I was a motor team mechanic, yet I'm in the comm shack working on radios, doing calls for fire with naval gunfire, artillery, close air support. He would commonly pull teams and say, hey, these 3 guys are casualties, and replace them with a supply guy, an S1 guy, and a motor T guy, and just see how you function. So the cross training was phenomenal. And after in that unit for about 2.5 years, I did not want to go back to a big Marine Corps unit. And I started looking, what else is out there? I loved the small team. We worked in 6-man fire control, FIC teams, fire control teams. And I just wanted to stay in that small type of unit because I really liked the camaraderie, and it was great. So that's when I interviewed at Intel, Counter Intel, and EOD. And Counter Intel got a weird vibe. Well, it seemed like a lot of folks in there waiting for the other guy to turn around and give him a hood. So with EOD, I felt a bit more comfortable. And so I ended up re-enlisting to go to EOD school. And you had it was a whole big long interview process and everything. They bring you to the range and they suit you up in TAP suits and you have to take exams. It was a whole couple of week long thing in the Marine Corps to do that. You couldn't even apply until you were a sergeant. So the junior guy in the shop or a junior Marine in the shop is a sergeant. You're not going to see anybody junior to that. So with that, went to school and I just found my calling. Came out of school and never looked back. I just absolutely love the field. Can't learn enough. Any school I could possibly get to, I went to. Anything I could do to experience something new or different. A nerding, the technical disassemblement and disassembly for intelligence exploitation of other countries' ordnance items was my niche. I just really enjoyed it. Got pretty good at it, though rusty, as the years go by. I'd love an opportunity to do it again. But and that's really where I fell into my niche. Now, I ended up making gunnery sergeant on the enlisted side and then went over to warrant officer, retired as a chief warrant officer. And I had started night school back when I was in Anglican. And I just kept doing the night school thing, and I ended up finishing my bachelor's, and then I finished a master's in forensic science. So when re-enlistment time came and, should I stay, should I go, and I opted to retire, I wanted to get out and do more forensics. Now, unbeknownst to me, the biggest war involving IED-related forensics was about to start in 6 months. But I retired, went on terminal leave in March of 2001, and then I was sitting in Crystal City when the plane drove into the Pentagon. And so after that, I started looking for other ways to get back with law enforcement, and that's how I ended up over with the Federal Air Marshal Service. I had tried teaching and doing some other things in the interim. I was down at Texas A&M for about 2 years, and it just wasn't scratching that itch. So I joined the Federal Air Marshal Service in the end of 2003 and absolutely loved it. The biggest mistake I made, Matt, was I accepted a promotion and I went to headquarters. Though I loved the work as the technology officer, I was getting into a lot of the technical aspects. So it was great. And then I ended up as the explosives branch chief for the National Canine Program, National Explosive Detection Canine Team Program. NEDCTP, the longest abbreviation of any federal organization. And I just couldn't deal with the grind of going in and out of DC. Just the commute in and out of a major city is just ridiculous. And so I went contracting and moved the family down to Florida. The youngest was still in school and she wanted to graduate where she could wear flip-flops. So Florida.
Florida it is.
And then I ended up doing 2 tours at Sexy Labs, which that's what happens when EOD techs get to name something. So they started the forensics on the IEDs first in Iraq and then in Afghanistan as well. And as they were developing these techniques and saying, hey, if we process this stuff more from a law enforcement perspective, we're getting more intelligence than if we're just doing and you know very well how we had done it in the past, what was called a room report of examination. And the IED report was just a hodgepodge thing pulled from the ordnance report, from the disassembly process for exploitation. So it worked, but it was very weak for the IED side of the house. So they started looking at more law enforcement related standard law enforcement processes, type of things that the FBI had commonly done, that the ATF had commonly done. And it worked a lot better. The intelligence value soared. So they said, well, what are we going to name this thing? And they said, we're going to go with Combined Explosives Exploitation Cell, CEXC, pronounced sexy.
I was about to say, sounds sexy to me.
Or you could be foreign ordnance exploitation, then you're foxy. Or you could be foxy and sexy if you're extra lucky. So I ended up doing about 12 months in Sexy Labs and 2 different tours, and then I did 9 months as I was the PM in Afghanistan for the counter ID mobile training teams, and that was a very rewarding trip, though very stressful because I was responsible for 28 people all around the country traveling in and out of in and out of the wire every day, and it was challenging. Lost a lot of sleep, but personally and professionally very rewarding. And I did a tour in Iraq as a EOD team lead in 2011, which was a new thing. It was a fully operational EOD team lead, and then they wouldn't give them the 60 series publications, which was stipulated on the contract. So they ended up having to remove us from the WPS contract and rewrite the EOD portion. And then in 2013, they started putting the guys back out there again, but they really gutted the operational ability of what they can and can't do, changed dramatically. So I was able to get a short tour in while going was still good, but I ended up the team lead for the first contracted operational EOD team, contracted by the United States to actually respond to calls, which was in Basra, Iraq. Second team deployed, Matt Nesbitt, retired Army First Sergeant, ran the first team to Baghdad, but they were told they're not doing anything till the Army leaves. Where in Basra, the Army was very shorthanded, and they wanted our support to cover the base when they launched. So it worked, and it worked very well for everybody involved working together. And that brings me to well, I started teaching Foley Dickinson when I was with the FAMs on the side, and I was teaching forensics and WMD, political issues, and a WMD terrorism awareness courses. And then a friend of mine, a guy I met while I was with the FAMs, he was John Frushi is his name now, Dr. Frushi. He retired from Essex County. He was a 9/11 responder. At the time, he was bomb tech and an arson investigator. And if you read up on the Seton Hall fire, he was the lead fire investigator for Essex County. And there's a book called After the Fire, and he's mentioned in it hundreds of times throughout the book. It's a very good book. And it's about two of the guys who survived, burned over about 80% of their body. And 3 students were killed and about 85 injured, jumping out of windows, trying to escape the fire, compound fractured legs. I mean, there's some kids who were really, really hurt. And he did a fantastic job with that, ended up getting 2 convictions on it after he was told it was an unsolvable case. He solved it, got indictments, and was able to get secure 2 convictions as well. But one of the things that John realized was that he felt from the minute he took the stand is that he was grossly unprepared for the 4 lawyers that these 2 kids, who were both mobsters kids, and they had like 4 mobster level lawyers who were just destroying them every day. And he testified for 2 weeks, 10 days. He was on the stand, full days. And he said, I just was grossly unprepared for what they hit me with. And he said, and I never want to see an arson investigator or fire investigator, probably put, or a bomb tech put in that position. By then, he had become a bomb tech because Essex County is a bomb arson unit. He later retired as the bomb arson unit commander, but he ended up with 9/11. He had some 9/11 related issues, so he was forced to retire. So he was really still looking to work. Going back to that feeling he had during his testimony throughout the whole Seton Hall fire, he was able to secure an interview out here at Oklahoma State University, and he proposed a program, a graduate program. And the university jumped on it. Not only did they jump on it, but everybody who comes into the program pays Oklahoma in-state tuition. So it's
no matter where they're from.
Beneficial. Exactly. So and what you now, of course, the focus of the program is on fire investigators, bomb techs, military, and public safety, whether they're local department, state police. We have them from all walks, federal agencies as well, but also explosive canine handlers, crime scene personnel, folks who work in labs. The initial stipulation is that they're supposed to be working in official capacity, but the bottom line is if somebody applies, they're going to be considered. And so if anybody has any questions, if you want to put my email up on the list, my OK State email, and if anybody is interested, have them contact me, and I'll send them information on the program and how to apply and who to contact with questions. And so that way they can get their questions answered and decide if they want to apply. And now we have a PhD program which launched last year. And actually, it launched last year. It was approved, and January was when the first classes started. So we're in our second semester of classes for the PhD. And things are going quite well. So that's what I've been doing now, except now actually I've just, last year I decided I wanted to step down from full-time because, well, it's 6 surgeries on my knee and 3 on my shoulders, and I'm healthy enough again, and hitting CrossFit, 4 or 5 days a week, and I figure I'll be 59 in November. I got a few more years I can run a little harder, so I dropped down to part-time status with the university so I could return to contracting. I want to go out and run contracts for a few more years, and then I can see about sitting behind a desk forever. I'm not quite ready for that yet,
I think, I love podcasts when I don't have to say much because it's not my show, it's your show. And you really did a great job of laying out, I'm sure you've done this once or twice in your life, laying out the story of your evolution. And I think one of the things that I wanted to touch on is that, from the days that you first looked at your first explosive device, whatever it was, whatever the first thing you learned how to dispose of or to dissect and investigate how it works, how far along in the grand scheme of things has bombs and ordnance and all that evolved since you first started doing it as a young Marine?
A lot, not much, because believe it or not, in the United States, still the most commonly recovered munition is going to be a hand grenade. Outside of hand grenades, the most commonly recovered munition is what's a 75 millimeter, what's called a shrapnel round. You got a bunch of what they were initially was musket balls. Now they're just a mixture of lead and other alloys, balls in the ballpark of about a 69 caliber ball, and they're just stacked up in front of a black powder explosive charge. So here we are in 2020, with still the most common military ordnance item recovered has black powder in it. So it's and that's the most common munition recovered, other than hand grenades. And by hand grenades, I mean of all different types. And hell, we use smokeless, not double base smokeless powder was the high explosive in the Mark I and the Mark II grenades. So if you have a grenade made prior to 1939, 1940, it probably has smokeless powder in it. After that is when we really ramped up on replacing it with TNT. We didn't start using, nobody started using high explosives and projectiles until the Germans in 1902. So in my book, I use 1900 as a break point because it's easy to remember. So if it's older than 1900, probably has black powder in it. Since then, you can have a whole hodgepodge of TNT. Then we started mixing different types of explosives. A lot of the mixtures that were done during World War I are formulated into a class called Chedites. And believe it or not, a lot of the Chedite explosives that you can find the recipes, if you Google street explosives, there was a Frenchman by the name of Street. That was his last name. And he patented all these explosives 1896 through 1898. And everyone thought they were a bunch of crap ideas. They're not very energetic. But what happened is during World War I, when everybody was running out of high explosives, they were relatively new and the raw materials were still being found.
Right.
So they started using these, what came to be known as a Chedite. You make a crappy batch of explosives that's kind of weak, add some TNT to it and ship it out. If it goes bang, it'll work. And because they were making, munitions by the tens or hundreds of millions, not by the thousands.
Right.
And so with that, a lot of the Chedite explosives that you're seeing now used in IEDs, or what the homemade explosives you're seeing used in IEDs, pretty much go back to a lot of similarities between them and the Chedite class explosives. And if you look at the ISIS they were making a lot of ordnance. They were making ordnance, you probably saw the old, what they call a Hell's Cannon, which is anything that's a big tube that points that way, that you can load something in and fire it. The term in the Middle East is pretty much, it's called a Hell's Cannon. Doesn't matter if it's this big or this big, it's a Hell's Cannon. So a lot of the mixtures they were using in these homemade mortars and homemade artillery boiled down to Cheddite class explosives, and they were using projectiles or even rockets with propane tanks that they were filling with HME. And when you look at the chemical breakdown of those, and you look at the chemistry on a lot of the Cheddite class explosives, same stuff. Chemistry is chemistry. So what are we seeing now? Things have changed a lot. Huge leaps and advancements on guidance systems. Heck, when I got out, a guided bomb unit, all the JDAMs and all of this stuff, we didn't have any of that when I was still in. I retired in 2001. And so a lot of the guidance systems they have now are just phenomenal. So just being able to take something and put it exactly where you need it is so much more beneficial, because it decreases the collateral damage, in essence, civilians or, women and children being killed, non-combatants. Now, I say women and children because I'm talking about outside the United States. We're talking about in the United States. There's as many women combatants now as there are men combatants.
Yeah.
And of course, children, we've all seen over the years in many countries, you've seen a lot of children soldiers. But often cases, they're pulled into that and made to do it. It's not a choice, where most adults are making a conscious choice and they're doing what they want to do. I think that's a defining difference.
Right.
But getting back to linear, I know you have a copy of my book. Did you pull out that back cover, or that spread under the back cover? Because that's when you get back to linear thinking.
Yeah. Well, here's the book.
If you open up that back cover and pull out that category group chart, there you go for linear thinking. Yeah.
Yes.
That's all your ordnance categories and groups. And if you can figure out the category and the group, you can ascertain the safety precautions, and you can keep operating, working safely as you're gaining more information on it, and with the ultimate intent of identifying it safely.
For anybody in the notes on the podcast itself will be the link to the book, also Tom's email. But I find it funny, and I'm not a bomb guy. I listen to everything you told me, and I'd be able to use whatever information you gave me to the best of my ability. But at the end of the day, I prefer to not be around bombs. But most people think that it's, what was the one with the bomb tech movie where in Afghanistan?
The Hurt Locker.
Hurt Locker. It's all about, having big stones, wearing your suit, and cutting the red wire, right? Or the green wire, the blue wire, whatever the wire is. And everybody thinks then all of a sudden the time clock stops and everything's good to go. That's kind of not how it works, right?
No, well, in most combat zones, when you get there and you're working on something, if you can get, whether you're doing an explosive disruption or you're going hands-on, the bottom line is what you're trying to do is secure that thing so A, it doesn't hurt anybody, B, so it doesn't hurt you, and C, so that you can gain as much forensics. By now the forensics were going up. So now if I can pull fingerprints, DNA, anything like that, and identify who the bomber is, now I know who to go kill. Now I'm not killing the wrong people, I'm killing the right people. And so with that, with that in mind, there is an ultimate goal in doing it. However, the basic rule of thumb is when you pulled up to a scene, you were out of there in 30 minutes, because within 30 minutes, you usually start taking mortar and small arms fire. So
I don't think people recognize that you're not in a vacuum where it's just you and you have all time in the world to figure this shit out, or whenever the time clock or whatever the theatrical side of the thing is. You literally have a small window before you become a bullet receptacle.
And where the first Gulf War was very conventional,
right.
In 94, I was the EOD team lead in Haiti. We went into Haiti after not having been there for 70 some odd years, and that was at that time the the terminology may have changed a bit, but that was considered a lick, low intensity conflict. And one of the things that I requested, and I remember when I requested it, and I had folks looking at me like I had three heads, and I had to have a little debate with a captain and a major, and I got the support half the time. I said, if we get an IED call, I want snipers for counter sniper. And they said, what? What do you need a sniper for on an IED call? I said, well, it's not for me. It's for, because oftentimes there was a common IRA technique is to lure the bomb tech out into an open area and then snipe you. And that's happened in Iraq and Afghanistan as well. And except oftentimes they weren't using snipers. They were just using four guys with automatic weapons, just start blasting the area where you're at. The good part is a bomb suit actually has a bit of protection. With that said, the first time I was on a team that had a bomb suit that fit me and a robot that worked, I was in 29 Palms and I was about 20 months from retirement. So I have yet to wear a bomb suit on an EOD call. Actually, the only time I wore a suit was in Iraq. I put the suit on in 2011, but most of the calls we went on, I couldn't have climbed over there in a suit. So I went without a suit just because if it's big, if it's say a 155, a suit isn't going to help you. Okay, right. All it's going to do is give them a torso to bury. That's, your torso will remain intact, but your arms are going to blow off, your legs are going to get snipped. So what's the point? Now, you asked earlier, though, you mentioned something about perspective. So when I was first applying for EOD, keep in mind, I had been in the Marine Corps for a while, so I kind of knew what was going on. And though there weren't any wars going on at that time, we had Beirut, which was 83. That was about it, but it was 82, 83. And but when I went to jump school with Anglico, one of the things I had to do is I had to say to myself, hey, this parachute might not open up. And you literally have to make a little conscious decision. You say, hey, I have to be okay with the fact that when I jump out of here, parachute might not open. Well, I have a second one. Okay, that's good. But that one could fail as well. You're not going to be the first person killed in a parachuting accident if you die. So with that in mind, I used that same logic when I was deciding whether or not to move to EOD. And I thought, well, I can get blown up doing this. And I remember thinking that I could live without, and keep in mind when I went to the EOD shop to interview, there were an awful lot of guys walking around missing fingers and missing body parts. So that has never been uncommon in EOD. So I came to the conclusion that I was okay with losing any part of my body except for my eyes. So you'll never see any pictures just seeing me working on stuff. I always had safety glasses on. And back in the 80s and 90s, you didn't really see much of that. Later 90s, you start seeing folks wearing a lot of safety glasses. But I tell guys, hey, put on your safety glasses. What? Put on your safety glasses. I don't want to wear those goggles. No, put on the glasses once. Oh, okay. They put them on. And I remember requesting to buy sunglasses for my EOD team and get like gargoyles or Oakleys or a good set of safety glasses. And it was a cheap set. And I was told, well, just have the guys wear these. I said, no, sir, it's not going to work. I want to buy them these glasses because the guys like them. And I don't give a shit if they like them. I said, well, I do, because if they don't like them, they're going to be here when something blows up in their face, or they're going to be sitting back in the car. If they like them and they think they look cool, they're going to be on their face when something blows up, which is where I want them. And he said, oh, okay. So he liked that logic, and he authorized the purchase. I was able to get the team some decent sunglasses with a clear lens safety that they, for indoors, that they could change out, but they still wore them. So that was the important part. So I kind of had that internal dialogue with myself. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and say you don't still get spooked on calls, because I've had things arm in my hand. I've had 40 mils arm in my hand. Yes, we used to move those. Apparently, they're not anymore. We did it for many years. We also hand safed M42 submunitions. And I was about 3 foot away from a warrant officer. I had the fuse of one go off in his hand. A couple of guys have been killed with those. 2 friends of mine have been killed with those. And I don't believe they move them or hand safe them anymore, except in a dire circumstance. Calls in EOD are categorized, a Cat A, B, C, and D, and everything is considered a C, which is run of the mill until it's not. Category A means all risk to the bomb technician goes out the window and you go hands on. So it all depends on what the situation is, very situationally dependent on what actions you should be taking. But I've had a few things happen that, oh, son of a bitch, you know what I mean? It kind of spooks you, and then it makes you think, oh, do I want to keep doing this? And the answer is, for me, has always been, well, yeah, I can't wait to do it again. But it's to say you're not spooked now and then, and I think that makes you more wary. But anyone who says they've never been scared on an EOD call is either exceptionally stupid, or they really don't know what's going on, or they're full of shit.
I mean, fear is literally a requirement to do to live in an environment like that. In any high risk environment, you have to have a healthy dose of fear. But the key is understanding your own internal makeup and how do you manage that fear, and how does it work as a reminder and a propellant versus a paralyzing emotional trigger that causes you to freeze when the shit hits the fan. And that's the difference between somebody who does what you do and somebody who doesn't want to take the last shot in a basketball game. Like it's the difference between those two things.
And I don't want to take the last shot in a basketball game because I'll miss by a mile. But now, there's a term called the long walk, which is when you step off from the safe area, heading out to wherever the call, whether it's an IED, ordnance item, whatever it is. And the problem is the information you get upon arrival at a scene can be very specific, yet completely wrong or inaccurate, or it can be very vague, yet the vague info you get is actually pretty spot on, and everything in between. So when you step off and you're doing a walk down, you have 1,000 things going through your brain, and especially if an IED is involved or any kind of a scenario where it's an area that's not normally under your control or your people's control, so you don't know what this may be, nothing more than a setup or booby trap, and there's something else out there.
Right.
And what I find is your level to process data goes up about 10,000%. You can suddenly hear things that I'm half deaf, and I can suddenly hear things that I couldn't hear. I can see things. I'm spotting things that I didn't spot 30 seconds ago when I was in the safe area. It's like you get a flood of adrenaline, but your focus is just like, you're so focused in the moment. And I'll tell you that right there, that feeling, that adrenaline, and that you're so hyper vigilant and everything is so heightened. Afterwards, I find it's like after a jump, you tend to be really tired. The adrenaline in that you get,
it's exhausting.
You get a bit of a dump. And after an EOD call, you tend to be tired. Yet I processed evidence where you've had EOD techs, military EOD techs. Literally one guy, I even told everybody else in the lab about this, and I said, this EOD tech's my new hero. The fellow had he processed 11 IEDs back to back to back. They were set up in a daisy chain, or in an array that would be like a daisy chain, except one incident wouldn't set them all off. They were all individual IEDs, but they were designed that people running for cover would trip more. And he kept finding them. And I think when he arrived, they had found 3, and they were sporting Afghan troops. And by the time this guy was done, he had completely processed 11 IEDs, and he was in a bomb suit it was something in the ballpark for like 6 hours. And his team was like, hey, let's get you out of the suit. Let's swap over. And he was like, no, I'm in the zone. And when a tech is like that, leave them alone. Let them keep going. When they start showing signs of fatigue, you may have to pull them. But if they're saying, hey, look, I'm good, I'm in the zone, let them go. And that's what they did in this situation. And I can't say enough for the job that tech did. He just did a phenomenal job. And I just saw numerous scenarios like that. The work they were doing in Afghanistan and Iraq was just absolutely incredible.
Let me ask a real quick question. So when, obviously we've been in war for 19 years now. When did the this changeover for as far as a mindset approach to the IEDs themselves, outside of trying to just dispose of them so they don't hurt anybody else? When did they switch to looking at this from more of an investigatory intelligence gathering perspective versus the traditional, let's just destroy an ordinance type mindset?
I'd say by '03, they were recognizing the benefits, but it really didn't become standardized until probably into '04, where they said, okay, this is going to be a structure. And the first task force, you could certainly Google Task Force Troy was the first task force dealing IED task force in Iraq was Task Force Troy, which was followed after that with Task Force Paladin in Afghanistan. And but once they started the process, they did so in a smart way. They hired contractors, but all of the folks that were coming in were latent print examiners, or what's called a certified latent print examiner. That's an annual certification that someone has to do a written test, a audible test. It used to be face-to-face. Now I'm assuming it's probably online. But to maintain that certification is an annual requirement. I'm now a fellow at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, and when you go there, nobody had ever heard of combat zone forensics. Now you go to a conference, you'll see 20 people presenting on it. A large majority of the fellows and many members are veterans, whether they went as a contractor, a government employee, non-military, have served in Iraq and Afghanistan in the labs. And of course, the labs then became a big target because the bad guys figured out that this is how we're catching them. So they started targeting the labs with indirect fire, direct vehicle bomb attacks, what they call a Trojan horse. They try to put a booby trap inside of the evidence, so it's faux evidence. So the scene looks legit. Something did blow up, but it's actually a lay. And I'm telling you, they get pretty good. And the evidence is collected and it's sent in. Well, the first process we do is we triage everything and we're inspecting it for booby traps. And but they're called Trojan horses. And they were trying to sneak Trojan horses in. That way, as a technician is disassembling it, it can injure or kill them. And try to just slow down the process, slow down the effect. But we break counter ID into 5 levels. The first 3 are forensic in nature. 4 and 5 are countermeasure in nature, countermeasure development, that type of stuff. So 1 is all the actions at the scene. 2 are those labs. The first time a forensic professional touches it, out pushed forward as possible. Level 3 is at the FBI lab, is called TDAC, the Terrorist Explosives Device Analytical Center. There's another one in England called DSTL. Most countries have a level 3, but in the United States, when TDAC stood up, it was in a room about 2 or 3 times the size of my office, and that was it. Now it's a massive facility down in Huntsville. They've really upped their game, and the amount of information they process down there is absolutely incredible, and it's a very good thing. But DNA is considered a level 3 capability, but they pushed that forward to the level 2 labs because they found if they can get the DNA turned around faster, they were able to identify people faster than having that evidence shipped all the way back to the United States and wait weeks and weeks for that, sometimes months and months before those reports would come back. I'm not just talking about basic swabs. I'm talking about, evidence on, on items. Let's say you got a missile strike on some bad guys and you have blood on a weapon. Well, if you can identify that DNA, because you might be looking for Joe Blow, and Joe Blow might be dead.
Right.
We don't want to be looking for dead people, So if you can identify who was killed and they're in the system, great, but they're dead. You know what I mean? And you're not worried about that person anymore. You're not looking for them. You're not wasting effort looking for them.
I think you see a lot of the news reports over the last 20 years about the number of soldiers killed in the war on terror, whether it be in Afghanistan or Iraq, and a large majority of them are caused by, and especially, and not even to mention the number of injured soldiers and Marines caused by IEDs. And I think one of the greatest assets that has been created over the years, and the reason why you see the numbers dwindling as far as the number of people injured and killed, is because of the knowledge that was gained through the forensic reconstructing IEDs and figuring out fingerprints, meaning who made it, the type of IED it is attributed to X person. I mean, understanding that the counterintelligence component to it
Absolutely.
is really important to that. And I don't know if people, I doubt very many people outside of people that are veterans would even recognize the nuances of why and how people are injured or killed in a conflict such as what's going on in Afghanistan, Iraq, because it's not as much conventional warfare anymore. And that, we pulled out the large assault forces have been pulled out for a while, and it's been special operations component for years. But the reality is that those IEDs are meant for anybody. Anybody that drives over that pressure plate or whatever, or if it's a detonated through a phone or whatever, but it's intended for to kill and to hurt. And if you can attribute the intention to someone and then target strike that someone and remove them, like Soleimani, like you just get rid of them. So, and that comes from the lower level guys doing the hard work of forensics on an IED. And I think that
a lot of times
I attribute to you a lot of.
You'll see a lot of that, the really technical electronics. So you have to remember, in Iraq, there were a lot of advanced universities. There were a lot of electrical engineers in Iraq when we invaded Iraq. So you had a lot of electrical engineers putting together these devices. So we would come up with equipment to block signals, and they would it was a cat and mouse game. They would circumvent it. We'd come up with something else. They'd circumvent it. We'd come up with something else. Well, in Afghanistan, they said, wow, look at this technical aspect and how this is going. Well, guess what? You can't jam a pressure plate. So they just went, they did use some electronics, but they really doubled down hard on the simplistic. And if it's simple, it works. And, or it tends to work more often than not. And instead of, I think in 2012, I remember collating the numbers on that. And just in that year, now this isn't everything that exploded. This is just things, because a lot of times infantry's out and items detonate around them, and they don't have the time or the expertise to go and really do a post-blast type thing, so they just move on. Well, convoys, an explosion will go and they're told, just keep moving through this area. It might be a bad area, so they keep moving. Right. I'm only talking about the devices that detonated that were processed, or IEDs that were recovered intact before they detonated. And there were well over 30,000 IEDs processed in 1 year just from Afghanistan. And that's not including caches either, because caches are classified different. Caches, you might get a couple of hundred IEDs in one cache. That's fine, but that doesn't count against that 30,000. So that 30,000, that's a real number you can hang your hat on. And that'll just give you an idea. That's a country the size of Texas. Imagine having 30,000 IEDs detonating in Texas within 1 year.
That puts that in some serious context.
And that'll just give you an idea what kind of Wild West area these EOD techs were working in. That's what I mean. The work they were doing was absolutely phenomenal.
Well, brother, we could do this all day long.
Absolutely.
I enjoy having a conversation with you. I always enjoyed our training days when we were in the field office, just gaining knowledge and your passion. And I think if anybody gets anything from this, they can recognize that not only are you an expert in the field, but you love what you do and you have a passion for what you do. And this book, it's not necessarily a page turner for the toilet, but if you have a passion for military ordnance and understanding just the nuances, the subtle nuances of different things like that, I dig it, because I like learning about shit I don't really understand and never really want to touch, but I dig military stuff. And if you're into that, this is a great book. There will be a link in the podcast notes and on all social media posts. But man, I just appreciate you making the time to come on. And
Absolutely. And Matt, if I recall correctly, I believe on some of those training days when I was the suicide bomber, I do believe you shot me in the face
I did.
twice.
I'm a firm believer in double tap into the face.
Yes, that's I remember that. That was funny. I got shot in the face about 20, 30 times during that whole sequence. That was a lot of fun.
We always had a lot of fun, man. And those were good
And
days.
a lot of welts. I ended up with a lot of welts on me too from those
People,
sins. But
I was talking to people about Sims. They go through, we weren't, if you wore like multiple layers of clothes, you were a pussy.
Yeah.
That was the whole thing. Like you had to just go in with your, like a flannel shirt or whatever, but they would penetrate the flannel shirt and be sticking in you. Like it looked like
Yeah.
heartburn. Like when you were done, it looked like you had, like somebody put cigarettes out on your arm. And
Yeah.
those were intense. And that was, and that I would argue was the best training I ever had, because it taught me how to move and to get out of way of stuff, how to make myself small in a confined environment.
And there was a punishment if you, didn't.
So
Yeah.
it was amazing. And brother, we could go back and talk war stories all day long, and maybe we'll have you back on again and do that. But listen, get the book, Practical Military Ordnance Identifications, available on Amazon, plenty other places as well. Tom Gersbeck at okstate.edu.
Yeah, Tom.Gersbeck at, and then letter OK, and then the word state.edu is my email, or just contact you and you can put them right in touch with me.
Absolutely. Hang tight, Tom. We'll talk off air. I do appreciate you being on. Everybody, thank you for listening to this episode of the 2 Dates in a Dash podcast with my special guest, Tom Gersbeck. The world isn't as unicorn and rainbows as we all like to believe.
Very true.
There are people out there who do dangerous things on a daily basis to try to keep us safe. Tom was one of them. And just remember that when you're bitching and moaning about, not being able to get your latte today, just remember there's somebody that's walking out 100 yards to a bomb that may or may not detonate, and there may or may not be people shooting at them while they're trying to defuse that bomb. So just keep that in mind when you're bitching and moaning about things that are really not that important. But I appreciate you. I appreciate everybody tuning in and subscribing to the podcast. And God bless everybody, and go out and be kind to one another.